Hey guys, my name is Kelsey. I'm going to be talking about image sliders today. They're also known as image slideshows. And so you've seen them on the web before in lots of web pages. Basically, they're a little gallery and then you can click the buttons to go back and forth through the pages. Okay? And so that's what we're going to be making. And you do have to use JavaScript as well as HTML and CSS, but it's fairly simple, and I think you'll be surprised at how easy it is. So you want to make sure that you have the images picked out, you want to make sure they're the right size and that they have valid names, and then you also want to put them in the right folder. Before you even start any of this, it just makes things easier. So make sure to put them inside the same folder as your HTML file, and preferably within a subfolder called images. So once you have that done, then you're going to start your HTML, and basically everything in the slideshow is inside the div, a div element. So you have your div tag, and then if you want to style it or something later, add a class to it. And then you have your images. I put 4 images in mine, and then the most important part in this to remember, the part that's a little different, is you have to add the class to it. And the class name has to be the same within all the images. That's going to help us with JavaScript later. So as long as you do that and add the source and alt, you should be good. And before closing the div tag, you want to add some buttons as well. So I added classes to my buttons, left button and right button, mostly so I could tell them apart. And on your right button, you might want to add an ID as well. It just makes positioning in CSS a lot easier later on. I added one. And so for the left button, that is the button that's going backwards. So that's why the onClick event is +divs -1. And then the right button is the one going forward, so it's just 1. And then, of course, we have our buttons, our arrows. It's just an ampersand sign, pound 10094 or 95 for the right arrow. So once you have your buttons and you've closed your div, the entire HTML document, more or less, depending on what you're doing, should look something like this. Now, the most important part, of course, is to include the script. Down here, your script source. If that's not there, none of it's going to work. So make sure you have that down there. And then we go into JavaScript. Now, this is all of the JavaScript that there is to it. It's really not hard at all. I'm going to attempt to do my best to explain it as far as I understand it. So this first line here is declaring the variable slide index. The slide index is basically all of the pictures and the slideshow. And so it's saying 1, so it's going to start out on the first part, the first image of the slide index. And then the show divs of the slide index is just showing the pictures. So it's saying that the first thing that's going to happen is it's going to show the very first picture. And then the function is when they press the button, the onClick event is +divs. And so that's just saying that that's what's going to happen is +divs when they click the button. And then the plus equals n, as far as I understand it, is just meaning that it's either going to go forward or backward in the function. And so then this part here, obviously you have your var x equals document.getElements by class name, and then the class name. And so make sure that that matches up with your HTML. I named my class name slides, so that's what I'm putting in there. And then you have 2 if statements. The first one is saying if they click the forward arrow, the right arrow, it's going to go on to the next picture. And if the second one is saying that if they go to the back arrow, it's going to go to the previous picture. And then there's a for loop there, basically saying that when you're done with all of the pictures, in my case, there's 4 pictures that I chose. So after it's done displaying all 4 pictures, it's automatically going to go back to the first one. or if you're going backwards, it's automatically going to go back as well. And so that part's important, especially if you don't want your users to be going back and forth within the arrows, having to find the right picture. Instead, they can just go back to the beginning by pressing one button over and over again. The style.display equals none is basically saying hide all of the other images that aren't being shown at that time. And then, of course, we have the rest of it. The style.display equals block is that when the image does show, it needs to be shown in the block display. So I hope you understood that part as best as you could. Once you have that down, this is what your page should look like, depending on your image, of course. So there's the H2 tag that I put that you saw my HTML in the very beginning. And then we have down here our arrows. So if you click on them, it'll go through the images and it works perfectly fine. The only thing is we're going to add some CSS so that it looks good as well. So the first thing I'm going to add is I'm going to add some margins. Now I didn't add a main, and so I'm using body. If you added a main, feel free to use that here. But I put a margin top of 100 pixels and then display block. I want it to be all in block display. And then I want everything to be centered on the page as well. So I put margin left and right, I set to auto, and then I put a width as well as 1,000 pixels, which is how big my images are. And the width is very important if you want your stuff centered as well on the page. It's not going to be centered unless you put that width in there and the auto for left and right. The rest is completely up to you, of course. I took a few liberties and I put a font family, Arial. I guess I spelled that wrong. I'll have to change that. For my font family for the H2 tag, and then there's a text align to the left, and I made the font size bigger. I put some letter spacing in there, and then I did a text transform to uppercase so that it could be all caps. And then for the image, this is important, is it has to be position relative, and that has to happen so that the button can float over the image. It can be on top of the image. Depending on what you want. That's what I want to do, so make sure you do that. And then the button, I adjusted the width and height of it. And then the background color I changed to black, and I wanted the arrows to be white. And then I added a cursor pointer so that the user could know for sure that this is a button. And then the top 50% basically is saying that on both the left and right, it's going to be at 50% down the image. And then the position, absolute, and that's going to make it so that it's on top of the image. That part's really important. If there's no absolute there, then your buttons aren't going to be on top of the image. Then, as I mentioned earlier, I have an ID right button. This is so that I can style the right button exactly where I want it. In this case, I just put left 1300 pixels. That's because I'm on a large laptop though. And so yours, especially if you're programming for mobile or for something small, you're not going to want to use pixels. You'll probably have to use something like percentage or whatever you feel like. And then just to overemphasize the fact that it is a button, I put a hover effect as well, changed the opacity and the transition. And then that's all the CSS I used. And then if you did everything like I did, this is what your page is going to look like. Of course, if you did a few things differently, then it's going to look different. But we have our left and our right arrows. We have the images here. It's all working. The hover effect is working. And when we go through all the images, it starts back up again, and both buttons are working. So that's how you do it, guys. I hope that you learned something. I hope that everything works for you. If not, let me know. And if you want to see my page, this is the URL. So yeah, good luck, and let me know if you have any questions or any problems.